So it's been about a month now that I've had the Steam Deck, and I've done a lot with it. I've kind of shown off different videos with it, and I've installed a lot of different applications onto it too. So it does a lot that I didn't quite expect completely. There are some quirks that I keep running into with it, sometimes with some of my non-Steam games more particularly, but for the most part, I've got a lot of different things installed on it. So the notable things are like the emulators, which are set up on a different SD card, and then some of the non-Steam games that I've got here. I've run into problems with some of them not accepting controller input and whatnot, but that could be a problem with the way that I'm trying to run it. But I'm not too worried about it because a lot of the, like Oblivion has issues detecting a controller. The other ones, like Graveyard Keeper and Iron Fury, not so much. It accepts the Steam input controller just fine. I don't know what's up with Lutra Swine, but it's kind of weird. Knights of the Old Republic, no controller stuff. So over the last month, with my experience, like I said, I've run into a couple of interesting different things with it. So first off, one thing that I found is in various games, particularly like first-person shooter games, what I will do is I will switch between the joystick for look and the touchpad so that I can get that finer control in it. And so like Left 4 Dead 2, I will go to the touchpad when I'm like mowing down individual zombies, and then into the gyro when I'm really like sniping. But for the most part, my general camera control is on the joystick. There are also games like KOTOR 2 where I just use the joystick because I don't really need that fine-grained control on the camera so much because it automatically does it. I haven't really tried any alternate operating systems on it. I've only stuck with, the standard Steam OS. As you may have noticed in some of my other videos, I've run into some quirks with like dealing with flat packs and like finding software that works. So if you either have to unlock the root system so that you can mess with it, but then you run the risk of basically getting stuff overwritten by doing that, and settings overwritten by doing that, by installing stuff through Pac-Man, and losing some of that work that you've done. Whereas with Flatpak or using app images, you don't run into that so much. And I know it's sad to say, but there are a lot of applications that do run on app images and Flatpaks. So if you don't like app images or Flatpaks, that may be a thing. You can install an alternate distro on it. Someone on, I think, Reddit did install Gentoo on theirs with it, and I was talking to someone in my Discord that had installed Arch using the, the kernel. Valve released the kernel for it in a repo that you can add to an Arch install, basically. And that includes a lot of the packages that are special for SteamOS. So I've been using, like, for the most part, standard controller schemes on most games. So like touchpad aim, your standard camera joystick stuff. I didn't really understand what Flickstick was until I saw a video about it from Fan the Deck. Yeah, it was Fan the Deck that talked about it, and so I've been experimenting with Flickstick in Doom, because I think that's kind of the easier one to really get the paradigm of Flickstick down. Which, if you imagine a twin-stick shooter, sort of like, Postal, and you just apply that same control scheme to the first-person shooter, that's what you're basically getting. So if you think of your first-person shooter from a top-down perspective, that's in essence what you're looking at. So I can... So you basically aim around on one plane with the joystick. Difference is when I push up, it'll be like wherever I'm facing forward is what it'll do. Get out of my way, guys. People, stop. No, stop, boyos. What's nice about having a stand to sit things on is not having to like worry about keeping it centered in the screen to where it's viewable. You just happens naturally. But yeah. So yeah, that works really nice. But let me show it off here in Free Doom Phase 1 for you. So I've still got my touchpad set as a standard one. So it does the normal thing. So you can see that I push up on it and it basically keeps me forward. I've already calibrated it for the most part, so you have to go and do some settings stuff. But you can see I flick backwards and I flick 90, flick 90. It's not exact, really. I flicked the thing. So yeah, it is kind of cheatsy too. So like when you go into it, it feels kind of cheatsy because you basically just flip around. So the only thing I'd worry about is like on, first person, certain like multiplayer games, if you're using it, it just seems like you're using a flippin' aimbot half the time, because you just like snap around to where it is, kind of like the turnaround feature in Steam input in some Source games. But yeah, you can see that if I push forward and I can go all the way around like this, it kind of comes up. So when I go into the controller settings, you've basically got to calibrate it down to whatever the game sensitivity is, and you can do that in here, so you'll just change the pixel value. But I wasn't quite aware of that, like what it did, and it's interesting. I've experimented with it, but for the most part, I've been basically playing standard games in essence. So, of course, the other thing is playing Skyrim Special Edition. It's coming out on the Switch, but it runs perfectly on the Steam Deck. Like, I mean, there is maybe the occasional stutter, but for the most part, it runs at a nice 60 frames. And I've been playing a bunch of games that I've played on PC previously, and it's not that bad of an experience, really. The weird part you get is when you've got joystick, a mouse-like joystick set up on the trackpad, and the game sensitivity to joystick movement isn't all that good. So you've got to like either dial in those settings, or you hope that the game is good with hybrid stuff. Kind of like Postal 2 does okay, like switching between like mouse and keyboard and controller on the fly. I know there are other games like Skyrim that don't flip between the two on the fly, and so you have to literally turn the controller off in settings in order to do it, or yeah, because I've connected keyboard and mouse to do like Skyrim exploits in the shops, and I had to turn the controller off in order to make it so that I could actually do it properly on here. The only other thing is you're going to run into controller schemes. So I've got a couple games that I've shown off in previous videos that show controller schemes that I've made myself. You will sometimes run into ones where they put it together and try and kind of make it feel like the Xbox, because there's no controller support at all, which like they've done in Fable the Lost Chapters. So those older games are going to have problems where hopefully, and for games that are decently popular enough, they've already got controller layouts. I think I've shown off mode shifts and things like that, but if you're used to a Steam controller, you're basically good to go, because the only real difference is you've got an actual D-pad, and then you've got a joystick here, and then like 2 extra buttons on the back. So, I mean, I've shown off the back of it and what it looks like already. You've got your nice fan grill, which can get kind of steamy. So that's the other thing that I've noticed, is the fan runs intermittently with the way it is. And so it'll run intermittently. It's not that warm, but it gets, like, it blows hot air pretty decently. So that's one thing to look out for, is the fact that you're going to be blowing hot air, and depending on your game, it's going to run your battery really dry. So that's some people's complaints, is the battery life is shorter than the Switch. I'm not too worried about it myself, but so yeah, you can dial in the performance per game profiles and whatnot. Oh, finally. But yeah, for the most part, I think a lot of people, I've heard their critiques of it, and I think for the most part that comes from a standpoint of basically never having used Linux before. So like these people that have used Windows for their gaming exclusively, PC gamers, and that's all they know. The people that you see that are more okay with it, like this kind of a thing, are those that have actually like dabbled in retro handhelds and building their own handhelds using a Raspberry Pi. So they've got some Linux experience, but nothing too deep. So you've got people like ETA Prime that talk about the Steam Deck and how awesome it is and working with it. But that's because they're coming from a background where they've already had to kind of tweak around with emulation station and whatnot to get things to work. Whereas someone coming from a console perspective or a Windows perspective is going to judge it differently because of their previous experience. So in a lot of ways, depending on your background, it can seem like it's harder or it's easier to deal with. Coming from somewhere where I've basically had to figure out like my own systems and whatnot, like ArchUser, by the way, it's not too hard. I dislike some of the things because of the way that they've picked packaging and whatnot, but it's not like I haven't been able to figure out getting things working on my own. And that's where the hiccup is going to be, like getting things working on your own. So for those that may be new to it, you may be looking at, oh, if you know your game runs on controller that you have on Steam. So if you've got a game, so for example, Synthetic here has a controller layout and it only shows as being playable. So, but with controller support, you can basically play it just fine. You just enable the gamepad template in there when you go in. So you just make sure, yeah. So gamepad with joystick trackpad, you just pick your gamepad one and you're good to go. Something, and even up here, so some games, let me see if I can find a different one quicker, but maybe down later. Oh. So something like Hrot says it's incompatible or whatever. So if we go into the details, we can see why. They're working at adding support or whatever. They've marked it as unsupported or incompatible, but I found that the gamepad actually works perfectly. So for whatever reason, so you've got to kind of like, if you know the games in your library and whether they've got controller support, then it'll run just fine with perfect controller support. Other than that, If it's decently popular and it's an older game, then you're likely to find a layout for it that you can take advantage of. People will have made a layout, and even some of them would have come from Steam controller layouts, which a lot of my Steam controller layouts have transitioned over to the Steam Deck just fine. So that is basically what I would look for. Kind of the biggest problem you're going to run into is basically the fact that some games may not run too well, or some games are going to have anti-cheat issues. Like, oh, actually, no, that's even more perfect. The anti-cheat issues are going to be things like, I know I've got it in here. So that's going to be your biggest issue, is the anti-cheat, really, is what it comes down to. If you're willing to tweak around with it and switch things around, you can get things working. If you want a just out-of-the-box experience, then for the most part, you're sticking to the green check marks, and you're double-checking the info on the, yellow info circles. There are some games that are going to be like big old question marks, and you're going to have to rely on hoping that someone's done a layout for it. So, yeah, you're basically going to run into that for the most part. And for, I think, most people watching my videos, they're already going to be well comfortable with a lot of it. So it's just a matter of, do I install an alternate distro on it? Do I install my distro onto an SD card? And I've looked at that as an option. So I've been debating on an Arch install on an SD card, but I don't have a 1 terabyte SD card, which is what I would want to do it on. Other than that, I'm looking for micro SD cards for expansion otherwise. But yeah, that's been kind of like my month long with the Steam Deck. And I've had a lot of good late night gaming sessions with it too, so I'm not unhappy with it. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe, share the video. Algorithm really seems to like that, and it actually helps it get directly out to more people. And you can even join the chat and interact when I'm not online or what have you in Discord, Guilded, XMPP, and check out my streaming stuff. Links are all in the description places, and I will see you guys later.